I'm Adrian, the cruise and travel guy, and I've just returned from a whirlwind press trip to the Sun Princess, the world's newest cruise ship. Along the way, I spent almost 50 hours in Asiana's business class product across its Airbus A350 and Boeing 777. I have a few thoughts and opinions, and I'm going to share them in my in-depth review. Flying anywhere from Australia can be overwhelming, but particularly on long jaunts to Europe, flying business class can definitely take the sting out of all of that time in the sky. I booked my flights around 7 or so weeks before departure, and at that time, Asiana offered the best value compared to other airlines such as Emirates, Qatar, and Singapore. I booked directly on the Asiana website, taking advantage of a few sign-up offers and coupons to get about 15% off the retail fare, which means the entire trip came in just shy of 7,400 Australian dollars. Steep, but still thousands less compared to Asiana's traditional competitors. My trip involved 4 flights, 3 on the newer Airbus A350 and 1 on board the now classic workhorse of the skies, the Boeing 777. My outbound flight would see me fly from Sydney to Rome via Seoul, with a 17-hour stopover in the South Korean capital, making me eligible for an STPC, or stopover paid by carrier, which I'll tell you more about shortly. In Sydney, check-in was swift and there was no queue at the business class counter. Immigration and security was likewise a cinch, and I took advantage of the business and first class line to skip the longer queues. Asiana is a Star Alliance airline, which meant my ticket provided me with access to the Air New Zealand lounge. I had been in this lounge back in 2018, and it seemed like not much had changed. It was a comfortable place to while away a couple of hours working, and there was a fairly comprehensive food offering, including a live cooking station. And I still love that the lounge offers a full-service bar and, more importantly in the early morning, a barista service. Soon it was time to board my first flight, a 10.5-hour jaunt to Seoul, which would see our A350 land at about 7 p.m. local time. Of course, I had done my fair share of research before booking these flights, and I knew that every single business class seat in Asiana's new Smartium business class product allows direct aisle access. There are 4 seats across the width of the plane, with alternating positions, meaning some seats are more private than others. Opt for even-numbered seats for more privacy, with the console separating you from the aisle. Odd-number seats are positioned right on the aisle, and I would avoid these if possible. In the center of the cabin, there are 2 seats, with odd-number rows providing couples with the best blend of privacy and togetherness. I would avoid these if you're traveling solo. The A350 cabin feels extra spacious thanks to Asiana's decision not to install overhead center bins. The cabin itself is rather bland looking with beige tones, though I do think it looks nicer in person, with the timber veneer of the tray table and console area being an understated but elegant design element. The seat itself is comfortable with lots of adjustment, and I enjoyed getting the perfect spot and liked that I could control the lumbar setting to really provide support for my lower back, which was especially good on long flights. The sturdy tray table is also really large and was perfect for working on my hefty 16-inch MacBook Pro. It also pushes forward out of the way in case you need to get up out of your seat during mealtime or while you're working. Storage was a definite letdown though, with one small pocket near the seat base providing just enough storage for a couple of cables and an AirPods case. Annoyingly, there was also nowhere to hang the supplied headphones when they weren't in use. Headphones, by the way, that are not noise cancelling. There was a universal power plug which made keeping my computer and phone charged a cinch, and a USB-A slot which was perfect for charging my AirPods and Apple Watch. Soon after boarding, and with classical music filling the cabin and providing a little bit of atmosphere, a tray of welcome drinks was provided with the option of champagne, juice, or water. On some of the flights, the menu was at the seat when I boarded, while on others it was handed out after takeoff. Annoyingly, and like many other airlines, there are no individual air vents on board, so you'll have to make do with the ambient temperature. A pillow and blanket are supplied at each seat, wrapped in plastic. For context, I only opened the blanket part on one of the 4 flights. The other 3, I definitely felt I was on the warmer side and didn't need it. Soon after takeoff, the friendly cabin crew took lunch orders. Passengers can opt for either a Western or Korean menu, but can't choose items from one or the other. In addition to the lunch service, there would be a second meal service about 2 hours before landing in South Korea, as well as a range of snacks that could be ordered at any time. Champagne, wine, spirits, and cocktails were also available throughout the flight. I chose the Korean menu and my table was soon set, with the starter arriving promptly along with my drink of choice, which remained topped up or refreshed entirely throughout the meal. I really enjoyed the presentation and the flavor of the meal. There was a lot of food, much more than I'd regularly eat for lunch, but I suppose that's part of the fun of traveling in business class. Service was definitely a highlight, and while I wouldn't describe it as overly warm, the crew were very professional and I found this to be consistent across all 4 flights. Annoyingly, and I know this is common across a number of airlines, but as the lunch service wound down and cleanup had happened, all of the window shades were drawn and closed. Being a daytime flight with only a time difference between countries of about an hour, I frankly couldn't understand the purpose and found the dark cabin made it difficult to work. Nevertheless, I did get some work done, and when I hit the call button to order a gin and tonic, an attendant was at my seat within seconds. After some working time, I decided to try the in-flight entertainment system. The screen itself is bright and well positioned when seated or reclined, and the touchscreen functionality worked well enough. I actually preferred to use the remote control though, using the buttons and keypad to toggle through and select various categories. Unfortunately, the range of TV shows and movies on offer is severely limited compared to some other mainstream airlines. Thankfully, I had preempted this and downloaded my favorite shows to my devices ahead of my flight. The second meal service began with the same starter for all passengers, and then there was a choice of main course. I selected the assorted seafood and it was quite delicious. Dessert was fruit and drinks were again offered throughout. Our arrival into Incheon Airport was off-peak, so the airport was basically empty, and this made for a smooth entry into the country. After I booked my flight, I had called Asiana's local office in Sydney to request my complimentary stopover. I was told that I would receive more information when I checked in Sydney, and I did. I received this sheet of paper. The instructions indicated I should head straight through immigration and customs once at the airport and then over to the Asiana service desk where I would find out more. My suitcase was checked through to Rome, so I packed my carry-on with supplies to see me through the overnight stop, and once at the desk I learned that I would be staying at the Airbus Styles close by the airport. It was only a short 15 or so minutes ride in a coach with a number of other people that were taking advantage of the stopover to our hotel, where the friendly check-in agents were clearly ready and waiting for all of us to arrive. I was soon on my way to room 427. Unfortunately, after a long day of travel, I entered the elevator and had no idea which button I was supposed to press. Eventually, I made it to my room, figuring out that F stood for 4, and found that the room was more than comfortable for an overnight stay. I really enjoyed this stopover. At first, I wasn't sure how I would feel, thinking that I just wanted to get to Rome, but actually it meant that I could be fully refreshed for the next day's flight, and that was something that I really appreciated. All transiting passengers were given a meeting time of 9 a.m. in the hotel lobby, and the coach appeared on time. Once back at the airport, it was simply a case of going straight through security and immigration, as my boarding pass for the second flight had been provided in Sydney. I went straight to the Asiana Lounge to while away the 2 or so hours before boarding. Although breakfast at the hotel was included with the stopover, I skipped it and instead had a little bite in the lounge. The lounge itself is spacious and bright with the huge windows overlooking the gate. I was there early enough that I was able to snag one of the highly coveted individual lounge chairs. With high sides, electrical outlets, and even an ottoman, it's easily the best spot in the Asiana Lounge for any traveler, but especially solo. The food on offer was really quite basic, with some lighter fruit and salad options, pre-made sandwiches, and a variety of hot food, adding to the cup noodles. A self-service bar provided a range of spirits and wines, though I couldn't see any sparkling or champagne option. There was also beer, a few other snacks, and an espresso machine. The lounge also offered a number of shower suites for those wanting to freshen up. Soon it was time to board the one and only 777 I would be flying on for the roughly 13.5-hour stint through to Rome. Compared to the A350, it was difficult to tell any difference when it came to the seat and immediate surrounds. In the cabin, I noticed that the 777 had the overhead center luggage bins compared to the A350's bare ceiling. I felt like this made the cabin feel more intimate. Service was again professional and courteous, with the cabin manager making a personal introduction at my seat and advising me of the expected flight time, and this happened on all 4 of the flights. An amenities kit was also provided on each flight, which contained an eye shade, earplugs, toothbrush and toothpaste, plus a comb and a range of moisturizing toiletries. Despite no pajamas being offered, slippers were provided at each seat. The menu differed slightly on this flight, but once again I opted for the Korean option. The food on board Asiana proved to be really well presented and of a high quality throughout my entire journey. I also really got a kick out of all of the side dishes that were supplied with the Korean main course. In this case, the sambap, which came with instructions on how to enjoy it. Once again, the window shades were drawn as soon as the lunch service concluded, and I tried to get some rest. There is no mattress protector provided like on some other airlines, but the seat itself was comfortable enough. I found that in fully flat mode, the bed was almost too flat, and I ended up picking a position with a slight incline to the backrest that was most comfortable for me. I managed to get a few hours rest, although it was continuously disrupted by announcements about turbulence. It wasn't the announcement so much, but the fact that I had turned off my entertainment screen, and every time an announcement was made across the PA system, the screen would turn back on. Everyone's did. So the entire cabin would be dark and then just become lit up in an instant. And that was incredibly disruptive. The international workhorse that is the 777 has been jetting around the world sky since the 90s. And although it's an incredible machine, there's no doubt that from a passenger perspective at least, the Airbus A350 has moved the game. I immediately noticed that the 777 was noisier on board and felt a lot drier. Within a couple of hours, I could feel my sinuses drying up, and that I did not experience, certainly not as quickly, on the Airbus A350. Between the noise and the dryness, I think they really contribute to arriving at your destination feeling a lot fresher. Again, there was a second meal service provided a few hours before landing, plus a range of snacks that could be ordered on demand. We arrived in Rome at about 6:30 p.m. and I can only imagine this was again an off-peak arrival because I was the first person through immigration, and the immigration staff there were incredibly friendly and just waiting for people to process. After an epic week on board Sun Princess, the ship docked in Barcelona on the morning of April 23rd, and after being witness to the naming ceremony, a moment I still pinch myself about, it was time to start the journey back home. A 9 p.m. departure from Barcelona meant I had a couple of hours to spare, and once again I had packed a change of clothes in my carry-on luggage so I could take advantage of the Joan Miro Lounge. After a shower and freshen up, I felt ready to tackle the 2 consecutive flights home. Unlike on the way over to Rome, on the way back home to Sydney there would only be a 3-hour stopover in Seoul. Both flights home to Sydney would also be on the newer Airbus A350. Asiana also offers a Wi-Fi connection on board its A350 aircraft, and annoyingly it isn't free or complimentary for those booked into business class. I opted for the full flight pass, which was actually 24 hours worth, which came in handy for the second flight to Sydney as well, and that cost about $22 US. Again, I opted for the even row window seats for maximum privacy and comfort. Just like my outbound flights, service was friendly and professional, and pre-takeoff champagne was a nice way to end my time in Europe. Menus were handed out after takeoff this time, with only a few minutes to peruse the options before the attendant was back to take my order. Noticing the Korean menu matched that of my earlier flights, I opted for the Western. The food was once again beautifully presented and quite delicious. It's a delicate meal service on board Asiana with small starters, hot bread served from a basket, and an olive oil balsamic mix that was perfect for dipping. For the main course, I chose the chicken kung pao. In retrospect, I should have opted for the tenderloin. I did manage to get a few hours rest after dinner, and like the earlier flights, a second 3-course meal was provided a few hours before we landed in South Korea. It started with a smoked salmon starter and then my choice of chicken stew, followed by fruit. Once in Seoul and with about 3 hours to spare in between my flights, I hightailed it through the transfer security, straight back into the Asiana Lounge and snagged myself one of those shower suites so I could once again freshen up. I can't tell you how great it feels to shower before a long-haul flight. I spent the next hour or so catching up on some work and taking advantage of the self-service bar before boarding flight number 4 for the 8 p.m. departure and what would be an overnight flight. The same seat and the same professional and courteous service that became a hallmark of my travels on Asiana ended up making me feel very comfortable for the final flight home. Dinner was served and I again opted for the Western menu. Although I did choose the duck bulgogi for my main course, so perhaps this was a fusion meal. After dinner and for the first time on any of my 4 flights, the window shades were left up, and I suspect that was so the cabin could lighten naturally as we neared Sydney. It also gave me an opportunity to witness first light on what was April 25th, Anzac Day. Lest we forget. Breakfast service soon followed, for which my order had been taken after dinner earlier in the flight, and soon the cabin was prepared for landing as my near 50 hours on board Asiana's aircraft were coming to an end. Overall, Asiana's business class product is a very solid offering. Although lacking in visual charm and storage, the seat itself is comfortable, and with granular electronic controls, I suspect most would be able to find their optimal position for sleeping. Steer clear of the odd-numbered rows if possible and opt for even-numbered seating at the window for the best privacy. I would still suggest coming prepared with your own entertainment options and maybe even your own noise-cancelling headphones. Meal service always felt luxurious, and while some dishes were better than others, coupled with the always available snacks, there was something to satisfy most tastes. The crew were incredibly professional and diligent whilst not being overly familiar. A personal introduction from the cabin manager before takeoff was also a really nice touch, and I also enjoyed that they would come around and say farewell before landing and then let us know which door we'd be using to exit the plane. Whilst the lengthy stopover in South Korea on the outbound flights to Europe might be a deal breaker for some, having that facility available at no extra cost was actually a fantastic way to break the trip up and continue the next day feeling refreshed. I have no hesitation in recommending Asiana's business class product for those seeking a little bit of extra comfort and room on long-haul flights, particularly from Australia to Europe, and at the moment at least, that seems to be at a lower cost base compared to their traditional competitors. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're looking to book a cruise, airline, travel, anything, head to my website, thecruiseandtravelguide.com.au, and you can give me a follow on Facebook and Instagram at The Cruise and Travel Guide to stay up to date with my travels as they happen. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Flying anywhere from Australia, but particularly on long-haul routes to Europe, can really be what? Flying anywhere from Australia can be particularly overwhelming, but especially on routes to Europe, what? A personal introduction from the flight manager was always a nice touch before takeoff, and even where we were also informed of which cabin exit we would be taking once the plane was ready to disembark. What? Where we were told which cabin exit we would be taking once we were deplaning.